Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Today on Shu Command, we talked with Ryan Zohar. Ryan is the Middle East librarian at Georgetown University. We got to speak about trends in academia amidst great political change in the world. We got to speak about Mizrahi identity and culture through film and publications. And we also spoke about library studies, Ryan's specialty.
Yeah, as speaker of 6 languages, Ryan has a background, obviously, in Middle Eastern studies, as well as translation, Jewish studies, and the history of the book. His invaluable expertise has guided many scholars at Georgetown and beyond. And also to note that the Shoe Command podcast is made possible because of the Georgetown Library. Much of the equipment that we use to film this project is graciously loaned to us by the library here at Georgetown.
Well, we hope you enjoyed this episode and we look forward for your feedback.
Welcome to the Shoe Command podcast, a project led by students at Georgetown's Center for Contemporary Arab Studies to inquire beyond the margins of what is on the surface among students and experts in the field of Middle East studies. I'm Lauren Burns.
And I'm Michelle Sindaha, and we're your host for the podcast, Shu Command.
Appreciated by faculty and students alike for his diligence and commitment to his craft. Today, we're joined by Ryan Zohar, Middle East Librarian at Georgetown University. Ryan, thank you so much for joining us
Thanks for having
today.
me. I'm blushing.
Any recent fishing trips? The last time I talked to you, you had gone on a fishing trip.
Yeah, last time we spoke, I was fishing in the Potomac. No, the most recent trip was to the Jersey Shore. It was mildly successful. Caught a summer flounder. Yeah.
How many?
Just one.
It's better than nothing. It's better than what I could probably do.
I'm still learning.
Did you eat it?
No, it wasn't quite that big.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you let it go back?
Catch and release, yeah.
Okay, that's
It's moral.
I would hope so.
well. It's good to have you on the podcast, Ryan.
Thanks for having me. I am here. I'm among esteemed company when it comes to the guests on this show, and certainly among the hosts as well.
Stop it. let's get to business.
Sure.
So Ryan, you're the Middle East librarian at Georgetown University. How's that been?
Yeah, so I work as the Middle East Studies librarian here. I'm on the Research Services Department, so that's the department in the library where we curate the general collections. We provide research support for students and faculty, so that can be anything from a one-on-one research consultation to having classes in special collections or me doing different library instructional sessions in the various campus classrooms. And then another thing that I'll do is I'll serve as sort of the first point of contact for different Middle East-related departments, programs, and centers on campus for questions related to things like scholarly communication and copyright, digital projects. We're working on a big digital project right now for the 50th anniversary of the Center for Contemporary Arab Studies.
Of course, this year.
Yeah, so very excited to be working up to the launch for that, and really just serve as the primary liaison for the academic departments whenever they have any sort of need from the library.
Right. What's the most time-consuming aspect of your job?
I like my job a lot because it is so varied. I get to do a little bit of that curation work every day. So that's working with vendors in the region to make sure that we get newly published books in Arabic, Turkish, Persian, etc. To the library. And of course, in addition to the English language university press books that we have and any sort of English language press books related to the Middle East and North Africa. So I get to do a little bit of that. Usually I'll have either a class or an appointment with a couple students who are working on research projects.
I've had
Yeah. So hopefully you guys can talk a little bit about your experiences working with librarians as well. But I really do like that variety. I think when I was sort of thinking about careers in librarianship, it wasn't until I met someone who did a similar position that I knew really how exciting this role could be. I think traditionally when people think about libraries, they don't always think about the most exciting jobs in the world. But this is a job where I feel like I've gotten to have one foot sort of firmly in the academic questions that I'm interested in, one foot sort of in the world of more of a practitioner's bent. So I get the balance of having kind of an academic career with also working on other things. Like a lot of what I do is import exports, and that's been like complicated by tariffs and stuff like that.
Interesting, right? Like
Certainly.
unique experience.
Yeah, I mean, and it's a really great vantage point, I think, for thinking about things like knowledge production. So, from my point of view, buying materials from the Middle East and North Africa, you get real insight into sort of what scholars in the region or what authors in the region are publishing about versus, you know, what we're finding people in Anglo-American academia are publishing about and how those things might be different. And I always like to acquire these sources from the region, especially ones that are traditionally underrepresented in North American libraries, because the knowledge that we have in these libraries influences the knowledge that gets produced.
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah, I'm curious what got you interested in this field in the first place.
Yeah, so I mean, I did Middle East studies as an undergrad. I started my undergraduate career in France at Sciences Po. I actually did a dual degree program. So for the first 2 years, I was in the south of France on the Riviera. It was a sort of beautiful time. I was on the Menton campus of Sciences Po, so that was focused on the Middle East and Mediterranean. And even during that time, I knew I wanted to do something focused on the region. Largely, my interest was driven by my family background, which I'm sure we can talk more about later. But I also really had an interest in learning more about the history and politics of the region. And then my third and fourth years were at Columbia University in the now famous Department of the Middle East, South Asian, and African Studies. And I really enjoyed my time there. It was there that I started to engage with librarians in this way. I met with the Jewish Studies librarian and the Middle East Studies librarian there to work on research projects. And I ended up even working in libraries briefly after graduating there. I worked as a digitization assistant on the Frank Lloyd Wright archives. So those were digitizing tapes from his oral history and archival recordings of Frank Lloyd Wright. It was an interesting project, but and it gave me a taste for libraries, but really didn't tell me what the role of Middle East Studies librarian would be like. And initially, after undergrad, I thought I was going to do a PhD. So I enrolled in a PhD at the University of Michigan in anthropology. I thought I was going to study Iraqi Jewish culture. I took a gap year. I deferred, and I did a Center for Arabic Study Abroad, CASA fellowship in Amman, Jordan. Right. And it was during that time that I became, I think, I drifted away from anthropology a little bit. There were reasons that I thought maybe the PhD wasn't the best fit for me at that moment, and I became more interested in textual questions. So I began visiting bookstores like the famous Ezbekiya in Amman, and I was really interested in the materials that they held there, and I kept thinking to myself, why am I seeing these materials here, but not necessarily in American library collections? Right. And that got me thinking about publishing history, still about academic questions, but sort of with a bit of a different perspective. And it wasn't until I got back to the U.S., I decided not to do the PhD program, that I thought, hey, maybe I should dip my toes into this library world. Right.
Wow.
So you grew up in New York.
That's right. I grew up in the New York suburbs, what I affectionately now refer to mostly as bridge and tunnel country. So just close enough to the city that it was tantalizing, but just far enough that it was a little bit difficult to get to.
Right. So it wasn't too far off, I guess. And so you grew up in the suburbs, I remember you told me, and what school did you go to? Or like, not specifically, how was the school environment, let's say?
I mean, the school environment was good. I really liked where I grew up. I think I have more of an appreciation for it now, having left it, than maybe I did at the time when I was in middle school and high school, when all I wanted was to be, a kid in the city. But I went to public school there. I enjoyed that very much, and eventually wanted to get kind of as far away as possible to study. I figured, if you're going to study another part of the world, and you're going to study international relations, which is what I thought I wanted to do at the time, you better get out of here. Yeah, you better go internationally. So that's why I wanted to go to a program where I started out at least not in the United States. So I did my first 2 years in France, but ended up coming closer to home for Columbia.
Of course, yeah, you keep coming back. You're not getting
and I keep going back to New York pretty regularly too to see family.
So one question we wanted to ask you is how you found the comparison between Sciences Po as a European or French institution versus American institutions like NYU and Columbia, as a student, as an academic. what were the differences?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that the models are different. I've learned to appreciate both of them. I'm really glad I had that sort of transatlantic experience, but I'll also caveat it with the fact that, you know, I was a very early undergrad when I was in France, and I recognize that maybe the graduate education is slightly different
Sure.
and something that I didn't get to experience. You know, I had that experience in the United States. But I found, you know, when I was in France, it was certainly more of a lecture-based curriculum. I was learning about the history of the Middle East and North Africa, and being taught to sort of memorize dates and facts and things like that,
Okay.
which ended up being a bit further away from the more seminar style of courses that I had, of course, in that
Right.
famous department of Mises, where of course Edward Said looms large, and I used to study up in the reading room of Butler Library, where they've recreated his collection in one of the rooms. I think it's on the 6th floor there. Yeah.
Wow. Well, you mentioned that like maybe your family background or your experience growing up is also kind of what influenced you when you were talking about why you got into library studies. Maybe you could tell us a little bit more about yourself in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, so again, my interest in the region was driven, in many ways by my family background. My grandparents are from Iraq and Lebanon, and were parts of the Jewish communities, respectively, in those countries. I'm still trying to do genealogical research to find exactly, you know, what their lives and the lives of those who came before them in my family were like. But it really was an effort to uncover that history, to better understand that history in really its full richness. Because I think we find that, you know, the histories that get told of Arab Jewish communities often get flattened for various reasons, either through, you know, Arab nationalist or Zionist methodological nationalism. And I was really interested in you know, where my family fit into all this.
Right, of course.
So, and it really was, I think, generational loss within my family as well, that kind of,
It's traumatic, of course.
yeah, I mean, so leaving, of course, their home countries, but then you know, I didn't grow up necessarily in a household where I was speaking Arabic, so learning Arabic was like a huge goal that I had. So
But your grandparents both spoke Arabic.
yeah, that's right.
And your parents?
My parents did not speak
They
Arabic.
did not,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. So that was a real goal of mine, was to kind of recover in a way. I mean, it sounds, you know, shallow, perhaps essentializing in some ways, but for me, you know, I really was interested in that connection, and was really interested in learning this language that was so meaningful to my grandparents, and you know, had the goal of being able to speak to them in their native language, which I was able to do with my grandfather shortly before he passed. So yeah.
That must have been a meaningful exchange.
Certainly, yeah. I mean, and I've found, even, you know, even delving into the history itself has been a meaningful way for me to better understand my family.
Right.
I think, because, you know, traditionally, growing up in America, there's a lot of sort of perceptions about the Middle East, especially growing up in America in the
Right.
post 9/11 world.
There's some sort of self-censorship also.
Yeah, certainly. And then even within the Jewish community, you often hear these things about the Arab world being sort of a bastion of anti-Semitism, or lands that were traditionally unfriendly to Jewish communities. And that wasn't really the relationship that my grandparents had
Right.
to the countries that they grew up in. You know, my grandfather would speak quite romantically, wistfully about the markets of Baghdad. He would, you know, every time he would hear the music of Kulthum, he would sing along. So he wasn't alone in that respect, of course. You know, both among his co-religionists, you know, Jews from Arab countries, but also, you know, those from other religions who were from the Arab world. I think there's a lot of commonalities there that people either don't know about or choose to ignore for political reasons.
Right.
And so, again, I found it valuable to sort of explore that history. But then my interests in the region, you know, became broader than that as well.
Sure.
I was interested in literature and history, and kind of branched out from that initial reason that I dove in, and kind of have taken off from there.
Right. Right. That's good. I wanted to ask you, have you read Professor Joseph Sassoon's book about the Sassoon family, or have you checked it out?
So yeah, I'm familiar with the book. I attended his the book launch at the Mortara Center.
Really?
This was now a couple of years ago, and I've spoken with Professor Sassoon about his archival work that led to that book.
Yeah, it was expansive.
Expansive.
He went to China, he went to India.
Yeah. And I mean, the Sassoons are a very, very famous family with this
Right.
really interesting transnational history. I think that in some ways is useful because um, just in terms of talking about how the history of the region isn't really a hermetically sealed one. I mean, I have the title of Middle East Studies Librarian, and we have other area studies librarians at the library. We have a Latin American Studies Librarian, an East Asian Studies Librarian. But one of the things that, we kind of walk this tight line, or there's a bit of tension where we're at once trying to express the importance of regional specificity, of linguistic specificity,
Sure.
of local knowledge and local history, but we're always pushing against this idea that the regions have ever been, historically isolated or hermetically sealed, right? These histories have always been transnational, and so Joseph's work, Professor Sassoon's work, does that, I think, really well through the history of this one particular family, which again, is a unique family and one with a sort of very unique vantage point and place within these particular countries where they were. But I think that speaks to a wider point that one can make methodologically within Middle East studies and Arab studies more broadly.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, you talked about learning Arabic so that you could talk to your grandfather,
Mm-hmm.
but I also know that you know a lot of like more than just Arabic and English. What other languages do you speak, and how did you learn them?
Yeah, I mean, I always say that I hesitate to say that I'm fluent, really, because my status of different, language skills kind of ebbs and flows. But I'm lucky. I'm lucky enough to have a job where I can sort of on a daily basis
Keep it
engage
up.
with these languages. So yeah, I mean, English. I took Spanish throughout middle school and high school, and I really was quite passionate about it. I took a lot of literature courses. After that, I obviously switched right from Spanish to French.
Sure.
Right, yeah, sure.
Moving to France and then taking courses at Sciences Po. And then, I also have degrees of, obviously I studied Arabic for many years. So studied it in France. I studied it in New York. I studied it in Egypt, Oman, Jordan for a while. But I feel like I'm never going to be quite done learning Arabic. I don't think anyone really.
I don't think anyone can say that. Yeah.
Yeah, and then dancing around in all the different dialects is a fun thing. So for a while I spoke mostly Egyptian, then I spoke mostly Shami, and now I speak a mix of God knows what. Yeah, exactly. So it's a familiar experience, I think, for many of us. I have some familiarity with Hebrew, both for family reasons, and then I've also taken private lessons.
Sure.
And then I've been taking Persian at Georgetown, so I'm several semesters in, and it definitely is a huge asset for my work. And I love the Persian Studies program here as well.
Okay.
So
Are you taking the Persian for Arabic speakers, or because they have two versions of the Persian class,
yeah,
right?
so they have. I wanted to enroll in the Persian for Arabic speakers class, but I, just given my schedule, the way that things fell, it made most sense for me to start out in the summer intensives, and
Okay.
they ended up not offering it then. But yeah, so it was a couple summers ago now that I was spending most of my days in the morning. So b'khair, hare shoma chatoy,
It's a nice sounding language.
It's a beautiful language.
My roommate's learning Persian. He starts when he gets angry. He starts speaking Persian.
That's funny. I don't find it a very angry language. It's a really beautiful language.
Yeah,
so that's funny.
maybe he's a bit angry. But
I mean, grammatically and to a certain extent, vocabulary-wise, I find it in some ways more rewarding than Arabic.
Okay.
How so? What do
Just
you
in
mean?
terms of the ability to see progress at a faster rate. Yeah.
Right.
No, I love both.
No,
languages.
no.
Indo-European.
Yeah, exactly. Different
Advantage.
language family,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
then
true.
diving into Persian, already having Arabic as a background,
It helped a
familiar
lot of
with
the vocabulary.
huge
right?
huge amount of
Smooth.
vocabulary.
So,
Yeah.
so I suppose you enjoy learning languages. And I suppose along the way it's become easier. Like you've picked up a few tactics to like combat the language.
I love learning languages. I love it, and it's like one of my great joys in life. I always say that I love that feeling of, feeling like you're in kindergarten again, where everything's new, right? And you're everything that you're exposed to, you're learning. So I love being humbled in that way, like being forced to reckon with, my status as a beginner, but then just, being able to absorb and be open to things in that way. So I've always really enjoyed language learning for that reason. but I do always feel like I'm in this constant battle where I'm fighting against language loss. I think it's something that a lot of us face. And you often hear if you don't use it, you lose it. And
It's true.
unfortunately, those folks are right. Yeah.
It's very true. So we wanted to ask you about this article that you wrote on Sirat Arabi, which is Hebrew for Arabic movie,
Yeah.
basically. We found it fascinating. It brings out a side of Mizrahi Jewish identity that's maybe not very recognized or well known, maybe on the points that you were touching on just a minute before. Can you tell us what the basic argument you made in that article was, and love to talk about it.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm glad that you guys found that article and that you enjoyed it. It's quite a while ago now that I wrote it, but it was a topic that really interested me. And the article was largely about this phenomenon of, at the height of sort of enmity between, the state of Israel and the Arab world. In particular, the article focuses on Egypt. This not paradoxical, but maybe somewhat surprising to people who think only on that geopolitical lens, phenomenon of Mizrahi or Arab Jews watching Arab films within Israel. And in particular, it focused on this phenomenon of the Friday night Seret Arabi, which is the Arab film, right? And I really enjoyed writing it because it allowed me to delve into Mizrahi cultural production and cultural consumption in a way that I think doesn't really get studied or sometimes gets erased. And I think my graduate work continued to sort of look at those sorts of phenomenon that might be get lost in sort of wider narratives. So in graduate school, I focused on publishing and reading practices between places like Haifa and Jerusalem and the Arab world. And I was really interested in the persistence of Mizrahi writing in Arabic after 1948. 1948 is, of course, this huge rupture. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians are expelled, and Jews shortly after, many of them leave the countries that they're in the Arab world or are expelled in other ways. But in some ways, there are these surprising instances of persistence, of the persistence of writing in Arabic on the part of Mizrahi Jews, and the insistence that their writing still be connected to the Arab world and to Arab readership in some ways. So in particular, with that project, I know now we're getting a little bit further afield from the film project, which I'm happy to talk about a little bit more later. But in that project, I was really interested in Iraqi Jews who wrote for mostly communist newspapers in Arabic out of places like Haifa and Jerusalem, and who wrote alongside very famous Palestinian writers, people like
Emil Habibi.
Emil Habibi, very famously, Tawfiq Zayed, Mahmoud Darwish even wrote for some of these same publications, Samih al-Qasim as well. And I was really interested in sort of the ways that they influenced each other's writing, the ways that they were still engaged in conversations that the rest of the world largely thought that they were cut off from. And I don't want to give the sense that 1948 isn't a rupture either for Palestinians or for these Jews. But I think that the sort of persistence of these ties and this political act of still remaining connected is something from which we can learn a lot. And I'm not naive in thinking that, there are immediate lessons that we can learn from today and sort of spring into action immediately. But I always do believe that, we can look back at history to imagine new possibilities for the future.
So Mizrahi Jews, upon relocating to what became Israel, they also faced a lot of problems in Israeli society as sort of a possibly second-class group following the more hegemonic Ashkenazi group. Maybe I'm simplifying, but
without a doubt. I mean, and your listeners will surely know this, but upon arrival to Israel, in the sort of massive waves of migration that came around that period after 48, for Iraqi Jews, the bulk of the migration was in the 50s. Right. They arrived to Israel. In many respects, were treated like second-class citizens. Their language was denigrated, sort of as the language of the enemy. They were like many of the new arrivals to the state, sent to transit camps. where they languished for many years, and Jews that were from Arab countries or from the wider Middle East as well. This is true for Iranian Jews too. They would languish in those transit camps for much longer than their Ashkenazi counterparts would. So while you might find that Iraqi Jewish families would stay in tents in these transit camps, which some of them later became villages for many years, the process would largely become quicker and Ashkenazi families would be relocated faster.
Right.
This is also true with regard to later waves of migration from, for example, North Africa, where instead of the transit camps, many North African Jews were, they would arrive at a port and they would be sort of taken via truck overnight to what are called development towns in largely rural areas of Israel, many of them in the Negev or the Naqab, or in the Galilee. And these would be towns that in many respects would be sort of built on what were then the unclear kind of frontiers of the state of Israel. And they would serve as a buffer in some ways, preventing Palestinians from returning, from populating these areas.
Arab states from potentially attacking.
Yeah, I mean, there is discussion that, in settling these peoples here,
Human shields.
They yes, so the human shields allegation gets thrown around quite a bit. And these development towns were places where it was difficult to get work. The same is true for transit camps. In many cases, without expressing party loyalty or party membership to the ruling Mapai party at the time, it was very difficult for Arab Jews to get work. And that was really a challenge. And these work permits could be revoked. There was a lot of political repression, especially of communist activity in these camps as well.
So on that point about like the Mizrahi Jews and the Arabs that sort of cross-pollinated in these communist publications, through reading this history, did you find some sort of sympathy specifically from the Mizrahi Jews and the plight of the Palestinians, or was there like a buffer somehow still?
Quite a divide.
Yeah, I mean, I hesitate to make any definitive kind of statements because, of course, like what you'll find on the pages of the press will vary from depending on the outlet, depending on the writer, depending on different periods. But there are many cases where you look at journals, for example, like Al-Ittihad, which is the Arabic publication of the Communist Party at the time, or Al-Jadid, which is the literary supplement of the Communist Party at the time, where along the same pages you're reading stories about the oppression of Palestinians, and you're reading stories about the oppression of Arab Jews within these transit camps. So they're adorning sort of the same pages. I think the readership for most of these publications was the Palestinian population primarily, but that's not to say that there weren't Arab Jewish readers as well. There certainly were Arab Jewish writers, many of them quite famous as well. Sasson Somech, Sami Michael, whose work I've translated a little bit of. Shimon Balas is another really famous one, and many of them get featured in a really wonderful film called Forget Baghdad that I'd really recommend if anyone hasn't seen it already.
Okay.
Are you a big film guy?
Yeah, I mean, I wrote that article about film.
Right.
I watched a lot of film to write that article. I really went into the Israel State Archives looking for documents about film, and particularly about Arab film at the time. I'm not as much of a film buff as maybe some other people are.
Loaded question.
Exactly. I'm not at the movie theater 2-3 times a week like some folks I know, but I really do love films, and I feel like from my position, it's really an interesting vantage point again to think about film, to acquire films, and I've been lucky enough to work with filmmakers. So some of my favorite films that we've acquired recently have been things like Jumana Menna's Magical Substance Flows Into Me. Mohammed Bakri's Since You've Left or Since You've Been Gone. It has various titles. And then Bye Bye Tiberius is one that we've been lucky enough to have screened at Georgetown, and then we've acquired it recently for the library as well. Some of the times I get to work with the distributors of these films. Other times I get to work with the filmmakers themselves.
Wow, that's very cool.
And that can be a really enjoyable experience. And then negotiating contracts can also be a kind of tedious experience in some ways too.
It's an important life skill.
Yes, certainly. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious, kind of thinking about you talking about the kinds of films that you've acquired for the Georgetown Library. And also just thinking about your role as the Middle East librarian over the past several years, have you noticed any specific trends in what students are really focusing on? Has that changed a lot or stayed the same since you've begun your position here?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things again that I love about this job is the variety. So in a given day, I'll find that I'm working on anything from early Islamic manuscripts to contemporary agricultural policy in Algeria. Really, like it spans quite a spectrum.
Right, and I guess the students that come to you also come with the wildest of topics sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes, and sometimes we have to bring them down to size, or sometimes we have to take a look at what the sources are that are actually available and accessible. But that said, I do think one of the things that I love about working with students in CCAS is, they're in an Arab studies program, but they're constantly sort of pushing at the boundaries of what people from the outside might think of as the traditional remit of an Arab studies program. So we'll often find students that are working on things like Amazigh studies, or working on things like Jewish studies, or working on things like other minority communities like the Druze or Armenians, etc. And so I've really always enjoyed that thinking on, I don't want to say thinking at the margins, but thinking really expansively about the idea of Arab history, about the idea of Arab studies. And I've always really enjoyed that this center is incredibly capacious in its view of that. I will say that there are always going to be trends that are more prominent in certain moments, obviously because of the horrible violence we're seeing in Gaza. Those topics are at the front of people's minds. And I get a lot of people working on projects related to Palestine, really important work, either to write about what's happening, write about Palestinian history, or to just document and record things before they get lost.
And I guess then, something as tragic as the genocide going on, it prompts people to approach it, but from many different aspects, I suppose. Like maybe they're interested generally in Palestine now, but they might pick any sort of thread to approach the topic.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other thing about, I hate to use such a horrible example to illustrate it, but it's another sort of interesting thing about having such an interdisciplinary program is people approach issues from all sorts of angles. And this work is academic, but it's also for many folks political. Definitely. And it leads people down different roads that they'll take both in their academic and professional careers. Another trend that I've seen in recent years is, and this is perhaps a sort of reaction to pushing against what people maybe see as the traditional centers geographically of Arab studies, but there's a real hunger and I think interest in North Africa that I'm seeing more and more of, that maybe wasn't as present in years past. And I think that's true with regard to American libraries' collecting practices. I think North Africa hasn't always been collected as widely as some of these other countries. Egypt and Lebanon get covered quite extensively. The Gulf more and more now.
More recently,
but North Africa is an area that I think we're going to see more and more demand for works in.
Right.
Yeah. Have you had you're talking about maybe sometimes students will come to you with these projects and having to bring them down to scale. I'm curious, what is some kind of project that a student has brought to you, or maybe that you've worked on your
Call
own?
them out.
No, we don't have to name any names, but where it was really difficult or a really big challenge to find sources for this kind of work, or something that was a really big challenge for you as a librarian to help find relevant material.
Yeah, I think scholars from the region, scholars of the region, have written for many years about difficulties of acquiring certain types of archival material from the region, whether for reasons of censorship, whether for reasons of these archives being either endangered or destroyed deliberately. So, projects where there's not a known archival repository or not an open archival repository, sometimes the material's there, but it's not openly accessible, it's not digitized, or maybe the metadata is not great, so it's not searchable.
You just can't find it.
You can't find it, right? We always say, if things aren't described, you basically don't have them. These are things like hidden collections. And so in order for them to be utilized by the scholarly community, they really need to be described. And I think described in such a way that's recognizable perhaps to speakers of the languages that these materials are in. For many years, the Library of Congress cataloged things using transliteration systems alone and not using the vernacular script of these languages. So it's only in like the last 15 to 20 years that we find that bibliographic records for materials in Arabic actually use the Arabic script, which is kind of a crazy thing to think about. One request I do get pretty often that's like almost impossible to field is people will ask me for archival material on XYZ thing or about, textbooks from Saudi Arabia. They want to study the educational system, but translated into English.
Okay.
So that's that's a very difficult thing to do. So while I'm happy to help people find material, translation's a different task entirely.
Okay. Ryan, I'd like to go back to Sirat Arabi because I find it so interesting.
Sure.
I find that phenomenon so interesting. So you said this was a certain period. When was this? The 60s, 70s, when it was the height of this phenomenon?
Yeah, so I think, and there's a wonderful film that was produced called Sirat Arabi as
Recently.
well. I forget exactly when it was filmed.
It's not too old, I think. I mean,
No,
I
I think
read about it in your article.
Yeah, so I mean, I talk about it a lot in that article, and the article itself also builds on the work of folks like Ella Shohat, who's done wonderful work on film, Sami Shalom Shatrit as well, Yehuda Shanab, and others. But the period that was discussed in the article is mainly the period in the 60s and 70s.
Right.
And the article does eventually talk about sort of attempts by, in some cases, Mizrahi filmmakers to revisit that phenomenon in some ways through new films that were created that kind of reference or quote in some ways in ways that talk about this phenomenon nostalgically and romantically in many respects. But the article itself is really about that period in the 60s and 70s.
And I think you mentioned the Israeli state sort of pushed back or saw a certain probably menace or danger through these films, like a certain fear.
Well, I mean, so one thing that's interesting is these films were broadcast on government channels.
Right.
So they were actually, government broadcasts, and these were things that people, I think, of a variety of political persuasions would watch. So in many ways, I think there was the idea that things that are, melodrama or love stories were politically diffuse and sort of not relevant. But actually, we find that this is another case in which we have Mizrahi Jews that are proclaiming some sort of persistent connection to the Arab world, which some people can say is nostalgic, some people can say is subversive. The extent to which it is politically valuable, I think, depends on who you are. But I think it certainly was a phenomenon that's worth exploring, and I think it's a case where we get to see sort of Mizrahi connection with the Arab world celebrated by these viewers in many ways, instead of denigrated. Oftentimes this connection with the Arab world was denigrated. Although I will say it's a very complicated sort of issue, and I think there's been critiques from the outside of this phenomenon as an apolitical thing as well. So there's been a few competing rap songs actually about this that reference this phenomenon as well that I talk about in the article.
And we'll link your article.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll let folks read it before I summarize the whole thing. But
right. I want to go back to talking about trends in academia.
Sure.
I think the elephant in the room in academia, AI.
Sure.
I'm curious as to what your stances are. How can it be used in a productive, good way? Can it not at all? I don't know. Or like, what has been your experience with maybe students using AI in academia?
Yeah.
Do you use it as a librarian here at Georgetown?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say that again. I won't speak in absolutes, but and nor am I an expert on artificial intelligence. But it's certainly something that we're dealing with more and more of, like everyone in academia,
Right.
And definitely from the perspective of the libraries as well. I remember a couple of years ago, we run a chat service through the library. It's one of our ways that we provide reference services. And all of a sudden we had this sort of deluge of chats that came in where people were asking us to help them find sources that looked real. They had a real author and a real sounding title and a real journal and a date, but they were I don't know,
Hallucinated.
hallucinated
Yeah,
citations. So we would often, so that was sort of my first exposure to.
When was that? Like
Ooh,
recent?
that was probably around, God, I don't know when the first instances of ChatGPT came out, but I want to say like 2022, 2023
Okay. Yeah.
is when we first started to see that. Now, of course, all these AI inclined research tools have come out, and some folks are using it in their research, and some folks are really avoiding it.
Yeah.
So I won't tell anyone what to do, but I will say that while I think that there are some useful applications of some of these tools for perhaps searching or digesting large amounts of materials, I really do worry in a couple of ways that it'll be harmful long term for the educational experience, for academic publishing, and for knowledge production more broadly.
Right.
I mean, two of my main concerns, one is just that it'll hamper human creativity. So in this kind of quest to find the perfect answer or to get that one response from a chatbot, you'll foreclose a lot of other possibilities. You'll be looking for that right answer instead of the answer that might not be the one that is the most popular, is the most cited, but might be the one where you want to push various academic fields to go. So I really worry about what it'll do to human creativity, one, and to the educational experience. But I also worry about things like the homogenization of knowledge. I mean, if we think about the internet, the vast majority of material that's on the internet is in English and is produced in the global north. And that's the material that ChatGPT and other AI tools get trained on. And if so, that's the material that's informing the answers that it gives us. We're missing out on a swath of other ways, a huge sort of swath of other ways of understanding the world, ways of thinking, forms of knowledge, different language sources in different languages that may exist. There are things that may exist also in oral traditions that we might not be getting. So they're out there, but they're not necessarily informing the responses that we're going to get from artificial intelligence.
That's a really good take.
Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, I'm not an expert, and I don't know, perhaps there are data scientists that are accounting and thinking about these sorts of things. I'm sure that there are, but these are my fears, as an anxious person, these are the things that I worry about.
Do you try to avoid it?
I'm not a huge user of artificial intelligence tools, occasionally maybe for like rote tasks and things like that. I will mention them to students if faculty members particularly ask me to teach with tools like things like Research Rabbit or Elicit. And, I'm not going to pretend that these tools don't exist. I'm not one to stick my head in the sand. So if people ask me about them, I'll try and contextualize them. They're out there. People are using them. So if they are using them, we want people to be as critical as possible in their engagement with them. And I hope that I can sort of help play that role.
Yeah. Yeah, I have interesting mixed feelings on AI.
Sure. I mean, and I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts too.
As a student, I was like, joining grad school, like, this is a lot of reading. And so maybe at the beginning, I was like, summarize this for me. And it would tell me things that were not true. It would or I would, brainstorm for like research papers, and it would give me these fake sources. Cause like, I knew this author, but I've never heard of this. You Google and it's just like, it's not true. So now I'm like a hard line. I don't
cold
use
turkey.
it.
Yeah.
I don't use it at all. But yeah, it's interesting hearing your experiences like interacting with students and your perspective on it. I think we live in a world with AI and everyone is talking about it. I want to not talk about it. Ironically, and then I ask you about it, but
some people are anticipating a sort of anti-AI discrimination. Sort of.
What does that mean?
It won't be too far from now when there's like physical robots around and stuff like that. Just like not allowing them into certain spaces.
The robots.
Yeah, some
Wow.
sort of futurology.
Huh, that's
This
interesting.
episode might get me in trouble.
It might get all
With
of
our
us, might get all of us in trouble
Nah.
with our
I'm sure.
overlords.
Whoops.
On another pressing subject, Ryan, you're a big so-called ugly sweater guy by your own admission.
Yeah.
What captivates you so much about this article of clothing?
That's
What do you
hysterical.
enjoy about it?
It's very funny because I thought about wearing one today, but I was like, oh, it's a little too warm still.
For
Wow.
Christmas special.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I didn't think you guys would dig this up. But I love looking cozy. I love feeling cozy. I love wearing things that are a little bit out there. Not that I did today. I'm a little bit plain, but I love feeling like I can stand out in certain ways. I might not dress. Well, in many ways, I think the ugly sweater isn't too far away from what we think of from as librarians. But I try to look professional and fun. Well, I think like the tweed jacket, the ugly sweater is
Hallmarks.
is a type
Okay.
of outfit we traditionally associate with academics or more readerly folks, of which I consider myself one. I just think they're fun.
No, I agree. I enjoy a mean, ugly sweater. It can be very versatile. Could be a conversation opener.
We should have all worn one
I know.
today. All three of us.
We should. We'll all wear ugly sweaters. Yeah, like Michelle said. We'll do a Christmas special with it.
That sounds good.
Is there anything maybe we didn't discuss or ask you about that's really pressing on your mind that you want to share, either with us, the viewers, or
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say that this is a critical moment for academia. And within that, it's a critical moment, I think, for libraries as well. Georgetown as an institution has been deeply affected by the federal cuts and the sort of Doge-induced changes, and the libraries affected by these as well. So, we've lost the funding that we've had from the Department of Education, the traditional Title VI funding that funds acquisitions for Hebrew, Arabic, Persian, etc., through the Arab Studies, the Center for Contemporary Arab Studies. That's been a huge loss. And these are going to be losses that are going to be felt by different scholarly communities. And that's true not just of Georgetown as an institution, but also of the challenges that are facing libraries more broadly with regard to censorship in this particular political moment that we're at, but also the gutting of things like the Institute for Museum and Library Services, which provide really crucial funding for urban library services and also really important rural library services. So I'm really concerned about the state of censorship of reading at the moment, censorship more broadly in academia, but I would also say the state of libraries and their institutional health for the future. Libraries are never going to be money makers, but they are things that if we do invest in them can do really transformative things for academia, for the future of human knowledge, and for the communities that we all live in. So yeah, maybe I'll just say that about libraries is my 2 cents. But
what can we do as students, as academics, as just everyday people? Like, how can we help support libraries, whether it's public, private? What can we be doing?
Yeah, I mean, I say, support your librarians. Always be sort of pushing for new acquisitions. Tell the departments, tell faculty, tell university leadership, tell your public libraries too that we need these items in libraries. We need to expand our library budgets. We need to have more librarians out there to teach classes so they're not sort of understaffed. These are all important things, I would say, especially also for public libraries. And there are organizations that are out there that are doing really important advocacy work. So I would say, following things like the American Library Association, what they're doing to try and challenge some of what's going on now from a legal perspective. Those are things I would say that are important to keep yourself aware of, but also local political advocacy. I mean, there's a billion things that we should all be advocating for politically right now. So it's hard to sort of find the space in some ways, but libraries are an issue where on a very, very local level, or on the level of student government. And we have we have a student library council that does really amazing work. These are bodies through which students, community members, faculty can advocate for more robust library services and a more free future for all of us when it comes to reading and knowledge.
Yeah. Get your library card.
Yeah, and get a library card if you don't already have one. Yeah, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this has been great, Ryan.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me.
joining us.
This
Thank you
this
for
has
being
been awesome.
An amazing guest.
I'm eager to be an amazing listener too. I'm really excited to get to listen to all the other sessions you guys have done.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
All
What are you up to after this? What's your plans?
I will probably head home and cook up some dinner.
What are you gonna make?
Did you catch any fish for dinner?
No fish. I feel like I set the wrong idea. I'm still very much a beginner when it comes to fishing. I mean, I do enjoy it. It's really a way for me to learn more about nature, to be more engaged with the local ecology, to learn more about the Potomac, the health of marine ecology and the fisheries in the local area. And it's a good way to get to know like the community you live in. And catching a fish is thrilling, but the learning experience, kind of like my interest in learning languages, is really why I love it.
Nice.
Full circle.
Full circle.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, no
Ryan.
problem. I should have asked you guys to talk about your experiences working with librarians as well.
It's been great. I love working with Ryan.
Okay, good to hear. Perfect.